Welcome back, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as every week, I have my two co-hosts, Howard Fulton and Paul West. But wait, I have a guest, but I'm gonna let the guys introduce and present our guest. So, how are we doing, guys?
Doing well, doing well. How was your vacation, Carlos?
It was amazing.
Good.
We,
They all should be,
we
right?
had great time. Was long flight, but it was worth it.
Of course, you
14
flew
hours.
first class, right?
We went first class. We actually decided to take our honeymoon. That after 5 years, we haven't taken our official honeymoon, so we
Dude,
went all the way.
after 5 years, it's just called a vacation.
That's right. You've had
Right.
13 other trips, but this
Your
one's your honeymoon.
honeymoon period has ended after 5 years. So I think let's welcome Guy. Guy, nice to see you, sir. We've been on the podcast before, right? We had you on like 3 years ago. So, Guy, okay, I'm gonna warn everybody. Please don't click off. I promise this isn't gonna sound as bad as it is. Guy is a privacy attorney.
Thanks.
Okay, so now that half the audience has clicked away, we do have what I think is a really interesting topic, but I think even more importantly, it's a critical topic for people to understand. It's not going to sound the most exciting, but on March 2nd, the Biden White House announced and released its national cybersecurity strategy. Within that strategy, there's a whole bunch of kind of goals, right? The two big goals are to rebalance the responsibility to defend cyberspace, which we're going to get into, and apparently some incentives to favor long-term investments, which also doesn't necessarily make any sense. There's some things I really like about it. Funding to defend critical infrastructure, I think, is a phenomenal kind of positive move in a direction that we've needed for a long time, right? The fact that has to be a plan in 2023 is a little baffling. Like that should have been a plan in 2003, right?
Is this federal infrastructure or all?
No, it's those things considered critical infrastructure, right? So power plants, telcos. If it's considered critical infrastructure, the plan theoretically encompasses it. I say theoretically because one, this isn't legislation, it's a plan. And two, until all the politics work out, we don't know what this is actually going to execute like.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So it's not regulatory. So this isn't a document of regulations. This is a document of a strategy, which will require legislative changes, regulatory changes, policy changes, all of that.
Yep. Okay. So it's you could think of it like a letter of intent. Would that be an okay way to think about it, Guy? Yeah. We intend to do this thing if everything works out in our favor and no one complains too incredibly bad, and we get the funding, and the boss says it's all right. The boss being the legislative body.
Right.
Okay. But the reason
there's no near-term worry is that what I'm
that's
hearing?
actually why I think it's worth having this conversation now, and why people should listen now is because now is the time to do all the worrying. Now is the time to do all the thinking. Now is the time to do all the responding, right? And have all the discussion to say, hey, what is actually reasonable here? What is not reasonable? Do this, don't do that, and start the phone calls and letter writing campaigns from a lobbying standpoint, right? Because there are things here that are incredibly dangerous. Right.
Okay. Can we do good, bad, and different? Can we go through the good and then maybe the bad and the indifferent?
We can. So defend critical infrastructure. So that's the first one that I think is. I think that's great. So that's investment in availability and resilience of critical infrastructure and the essential services it provides. Right. So. Right. The second one, which I also think is potentially very good, obviously we'll have to see what it's like, but it's titled Disrupt and Dismantle Threat Actors. The valuable piece to that is we haven't really had a way to refer to hackers as damaging in the same way we refer to military action,
Hmm.
right? And so this takes an important step in effectively saying this is as important, if not more important, than those who take military action, right? If you're gonna riot outside an embassy, you can damage that embassy, you can burn the embassy, and you can kill some people. But to do that within the U.S. is significantly harder. Hacking within the U.S. from across the pond into the U.S. no harder than hacking across the pond to across the pond, right? The digital world is effectively separated by 0 inches. So to change how we look at that and say this is in fact of huge strategic importance, allows the departments of the federal government that could respond to then take action as though more as though it was someone attacking a military base or a physical installation, which we haven't done up to this point, right? And so it kind of opens the floodgates for CIA, NSA, DoD, DIA to start responding to these things in a FBI to respond to these with all their power.
Is this a unifying strategy? Because I have to think some of those entities, departments already have capability and a means to respond.
Sure, but in order for them to respond, they have to be asked. They have to be invited. There's all kinds of politics that go on in those conversations, right? And this way, they don't really have to wait to ask, right? It's a change in orders, not a change in capability. It's a change in defined operating theater would be probably a better term. Again, I think that's good. What do you think, Kai?
Yeah, no, I think so. And a more coordinated effort, and really on the dismantling, right? There are already agencies out there. There are already initiatives that are focused on, dismantling the threat actors. And take it with the entire plan, right? Where one of the things that I can see is a potential question mark coming up is, how does this play in the public-private space? Because we'll talk, on some of the other issues, right? There's a lot of focus on private sector, and that is a fundamental shift in national security to, in large part, that now there's the potential, right? It's a roadmap, it's a plan, but there is a potential for an argument that, this advocates for conscripting the private sector into national defense, national security. And that, of course, with that comes dollars, right? That comes time, that comes investment. Really, are we going to be able to have enough support behind that we start focusing private sector resources on national security? That's one of the places where I see, I like this particular principle. I think this is a really good one and something we should be focused on. The question is, to what degree can we expect to see buy-in, and can we expect to see industry be willing to accept it, versus, cool, you want us to do that, we're pulling out, we're going to go to another area, another jurisdiction where we don't have to comply with all of these things. We don't have to spend these resources.
Sure.
So it's still to be seen. I do think, though, on the first one, the defending critical infrastructure, likely the easiest one to get implemented, and with the least amount of legislative friction. And that's going to come through changes to the FARs, which, right, don't necessarily require an act of Congress to do. If federal, spending regulations say, in order to provide services into this particular industry, you have to have X, Y, and Z security, it's there. Right. So, and we're already seeing it. I mean, right. This all came out of the, in the aftermath of the pipeline attack. We saw new requirements. NIST had new controls come out. That part is, I think that's at our doorstep, if not already in the House. So I can see that one going. But again, I think it's right, as long as it doesn't go beyond critical infrastructure, then we're going to see swift action on that one, or could see swift action.
But if we stay at critical infrastructure, and I buy that the current regulatory bodies could say, listen, in order for you to get a government contract, you need to comply to these standards. I buy that. But it's a pretty big leap from that to thou shalt implement actions when I ask you to if there's a threat detected. Like, that's a big jump, it sounds like. Yeah.
No, that's an enormous jump, right?
Yeah.
So it's also worth noting the SEC and the FBI have been trying for years to force reporting in a breach.
Mhm.
Right. The FBI has tried everything they can to just say, please, 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 if you get ransomware, please tell us, please involve us, please get us involved quickly. The bit of it is they're not really useful when it does happen. Right. So if you do involve them, they're not actually useful. So I don't really see the upside to it personally. Cool. You file your police report. Okay, cool. You file it with the feds because it's not a local jurisdiction issue, although you probably do that too. I don't remember. And then you give that to your cyber insurance, and then that's kind of where it ends. FBI does nothing from that point. And that's a little bit annoying, right? Like if you want to be involved, I expect you to take action. Otherwise, I got other shit to do. Right? It's the most chaotic period, most heads down period of any organization. So hopefully this comes along with additional funding to help fight these threat actors, because they are hugely disruptive. The other issue I see is I did a little bit of consulting for a critical infrastructure, right? Kind of water and power sort of thing. They didn't understand the basics of network routing. And I mean the absolute basics, like 1975 layer 3 routing. And wanted to kind of argue it and just have a flat network with everything open for them and their contractors. And yeah, it's embarrassing. And their contractor didn't know any better either.
So it makes it easier to asset to find all the resources.
Way easier. Effectively, no security of any kind, right? And that's a little frustrating. Again, in this was 2022, so in 2022, right? Like, and then to say, hey, by the way, you now have all kinds of new pressure. What are we going to do to make sure that's effective, right? How do we have some checks and balances? What are we going to do to say, like, do we have the ability to say if you don't meet NIST 2.0, as an example, you will not be legally allowed to operate within the state, within the country, right? What's the time to remediate? Who confirms the remediation? Because if we just use third-party audit companies, the third-party audit company will just pass you, right? For a long time, audit companies have just been, look, if we don't pass them, they won't use us again. They'll use the audit company that does pass them, so we'll just pass them anyways. Right?
So are there no standards now that they have to adhere to?
No, not really.
Logical or?
I mean,
physical?
yeah.
Really?
Agencies get, actual agencies get their own directives, but again, these are controls that are by NIST, but where the accountability is not there. And I mean, and this is, going to with the SEC and the FBI wanting breach reporting. I mean, this is a problem of the Fed's own making, right? This all goes back to mid 2000s when the state data breach notification laws started going into effect. And, we've all lived under that one, right? It's 50 different laws and it's 50 different pieces. Well, at the time, the Feds had the opportunity to pass a federal data breach notification law, right? Which would have required reporting to the FBI, reporting to the SEC, given us better information and insight at a national level. But because a couple states decided to do it first and then they went hands off, now we've got a patchwork quilt. We're seeing the same thing on the privacy side too now, where California, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, and Utah, right? They're the first five, and they've put their privacy laws in place. There is a federal privacy bill that's floating around, and it made some decent progress last year. But when the federal bill came out of committee and went into Congress, the remarks were, well, there are a couple states that have already fought really hard to put these laws in place, and we can't let those laws be overridden. So put it on the back burner. right? Because and so those are going to be fights that we're going to get into, where because we haven't addressed it way back when it should have been addressed in the first place, now we have to fight with not only getting the right structures in place, but also how does this impact programs and frameworks that have been developed because at the state level, because the feds didn't act. I see that is also going to be a struggle point. Now, a couple things that the feds are already sending some signals of this requirement is the EPA recently announced and told the states they're going to have to introduce cybersecurity requirements to meet EPA requirements. And so there is going to, it's a pretty clear signal that they're going to try to take some aggressive steps at a federal level. How effective it is and how much pushback there is still to be seen. But as of right now, I mean, no, there's not a lot of requirements and accountability for compliance. CMMC is an attempt at that, but that's such a convoluted process that most are looking at, okay, cool, get me to phase 1 of CMMC, which is essentially nothing. And that's about as far as you got to go right now. As long as you're not doing anything, weapons related, you're probably okay. And that's still not going to prevent things like the pipeline attack or prevent, certain supply chain attacks that we see happen or see attempted with fairly regular, at a fairly regular clip.
So did you see the state of Ohio has a new motion to change their flag specifically?
No.
Yeah, it looks like this. It's this and then this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then
So
another
is there any other good parts before you sort of jump into the worst parts?
No. I mean,
okay.
There's a bunch of other parts that I think are interesting, but there's not enough detail in them to explain what they mean. Like we were talking a little before this started, right? There's a request to promote IPv6. I don't know what the hell that does for security. IPv4. Okay. I mean, maybe somebody smarter than me can say in the comments what they think that does for security, but DNS still runs on IPv4. There's no IPv6 DNS, and DNS is a pretty big problem. And if you don't fix that, you kind of haven't really fixed anything, right?
And that was something that I thought was really interesting in reading through it, because in the same place that they that point out the slow adoption is IPv6 as a by the way, that is one of the most urgent and pervasive concerns, according to the plan. In the same sentence, they talk about the other urgent ones are border gateway protocol vulnerabilities and unencrypted DNS requests. Right? Sure. How does that get fixed?
Well, and
or does it even need to?
We've had DNS security for a while, but it doesn't actually solve anything. If I can still spoof core certificates and I can still break certificates, then I can also sec my own DNS server to be whatever the hell I want, right? Like there's so many core vulnerabilities that continue to get found in things that are core to how the internet works, that those things don't fix any of it, right? I think before you're allowed to write any of this stuff, you should have to stand up on stage at DEF CON and actually try to advocate. Because it's funny how many of these topics have come up at DEF CON, as in, hey, everybody said this would fix it. Let me show you why it doesn't. And that was the DNSSEC one was 7-ish years ago. Like fundamentally, DNSSEC is just broken. So that's not really going to solve the problem. I appreciate kind of what the Fed's trying to do, but it speaks to a lack of understanding. So let's talk about 3.3.
Yeah, because that is it's the biggest crux of the problem with all of this.
Yeah. So let's start the conversation with there's a lot of regulatory chatter in general, right? Privacy, ethics within AI and machine learning, legal usage of artificial intelligence, bias, a lot of AI stuff right now, right? One of the biggest issues in all of it is not that we don't need to do something. We absolutely need to do something, but we also need to consider how we play in the global arena. Neil Stephenson said 40 years ago, Neil Stephenson wrote, "The United States provides three things to the world. We excel at three things: pizza, entertainment, and microcode." Right? Those are the three things we bring to the world. We deliver more varieties of pizza faster than anywhere else in the world. We're the, Hollywood, right? We're the entertainment capital of the world from that perspective. And then software. And it certainly was true in the 80s. We were ahead of every other nation in quantity and quality of code produced as those two things together. But it does speak to how we need to be able to compete in an international stage, and how we have to temper and we have to balance all of this legislation through the lens of, if the competition isn't doing it, at what point do they outpace us in what is likely to be the largest single location of wealth within an economy? Forget about people, but an economy, right? Are we okay going from the first largest economy in the world to the 10th? Because we've placed silly restrictions, and I do mean silly. Good restrictions we got to deal with, but silly restrictions on artificial intelligence, silly restrictions on software security. So now after we've talked about that for a second, laid a foundation. Now let's talk about 3.3.
What's 3.3?
Go ahead, guys.
So 3.3 is, and this was the one this was of the objectives, right? This is the objective that caught everybody's attention, and rightfully so, because there's those 5 core objectives for improving cybersecurity, 2 ways of doing it. And one of them, the big one, is rebalancing the responsibility to defend cyberspace. That sounds great. 3.3 says software developers should be the ones that are responsible for breaches, right? So responsible for the cost, responsible for all of the fallout, and that businesses and end users and critical infrastructure shouldn't have as much responsibility. That sounds good, I suppose, in the abstract.
Sounds horrible. Sounds like someone who's never, ever talked to a software developer, never run an organization, never nothing.
Well,
right? It seems like somebody that their identity got stolen and wants to lash out at somebody.
Yeah. Well, exactly. This is where I get really nervous about how much of the rest of this can work, because of the way that the plan is kind of explained, and how this objective appears to, where the plan seems to think the problem lies, is where I start to question, how can we get the rest of this to work? And so breaking down 3.3, it really starts to focus on, it says that the market imposes inadequate costs and often rewards those entities that introduce vulnerable products or services into our digital ecosystem. Of the breaches that I'm familiar with, it was not consumer products, in large part, that result in the massive problems of breaches, right? These are often B2B systems or their own proprietary blend systems, right? Sure, there are some circumstances where consumer grade product suffers a breach, but the focus appears to be, just with that opening, is, hey, if you're building things and clearly there's dubious practices with respect to security, that's the source of our problem, right? That's the source of the threat to national security, not still using infrastructure from the 70s, not making sure that we're doing even the most basic security hygiene, the basic security training for personnel. It's software is getting sent out with massive vulnerabilities.
Well, and that's not untrue. So let's pause for a second. That's untrue, right? Like take the SolarWinds hack, right? Embedded credentials were password 123 or something close enough, right? Like okay, cool. Should they have some liability? Yeah, I think they should. Should they go bankrupt because of it? Right? Like
shouldn't it be part of the security basic that guy's mentioning? You get a system, you need to change the basic password.
No. This was embedded credentials. This was not something that you changed, right? This was embedded credentials for their update service that allowed attackers to add malicious code to the update server that then was downloaded by all the LastPass customers, right? But then okay, so fine, we can say LastPass has culpability there, but then turn it around to it was either the Target or Home Depot hack. The fire alarm system was compromised. It was an IoT device that was compromised. They then moved that into the POS system. Okay, this is a problem because while you could in fact say the fire alarm company didn't use proper practices in securing their IoT protocols, it did nothing to do with how it was connected to the network. That never should have been on the POS system, right? So where do you draw the line? How do you define this? Additionally, zero trust, which the federal government has said all agencies must support, specifically is designed because you can't trust any application. If you could solve it simply by legislating cybersecurity within applications, we wouldn't need zero trust, but there's no way to do that, right? What do we do about 0 days? 0 days are always going to exist, right? The only secure platform you have on a Friday ends when you clock out on Friday, right? Like it's you there's no such thing as perfect security. So are we attempting to motivate companies to be better? Okay, I support that, right? To have security at the table before we go to operations. Again, I support that. But at what point do we demotivate software development in the U.S.?
And what's the not necessarily just the control, because that's certainly a problem, but what's the context of the individual versus the company? Like vast majority of software is written by individual contributors, right?
Well, and it excludes open source. Like it's specific.
Yeah, but even code written by an organization, a lot of those people are consultants.
Sure.
Contracted consultants, and therefore, are they taking on personal liability for this?
Sure. Well, and what company has a software package that is free from open source libraries? Right.
Exactly zero.
Yeah, there is nothing of substance that is free from open source libraries.
Right.
So
are you GPL all over the place? Yeah.
Right. So are you saying the only to protect yourself, you have to design everything in-house? Well, that's just going to introduce tens of thousands more vulnerabilities and slow the entire process down. Right. So at what point, again, are we demotivating people to develop software in the US? Like it seems like this is weird. That's all I'm saying. It just seems
or worse yet, the opposite, where the government will create libraries that you must include in your code set.
That's far worse.
Therefore, moving along you to the government.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, you joke, but that's potentially where we're going. And on the open source piece, there is there is this the concept that says, hey, open source developers shouldn't be responsible, but at the same time, one of the ills that the plan calls out is that software makers, as they're referred to in the plan, developers are using they're integrating third-party software that's unvetted and of unknown provenance, right? So that, although sure, open source developers, the plan steers away from looking at liability, that if that part takes hold, right, unvetted, unknown provenance, that could have a chilling effect on the incorporation of open source, right, and on the sharing of open source projects, just simply because it gives the argument of, well, it's unvetted, except that it's not, right? It's gone, the community continues to review, continues to improve, but that could drive even more proprietary development or wrapping things around proprietary, or under a proprietary umbrella. Again, it's going to slow down development, and could wind up frustrating the entire proliferation of open source libraries in the first place.
Right, which would be a big problem because nothing has the eyes on it that open source has. Right.
Yep.
So yes, when you have something like Log4j, the ramifications are enormous. At the same time, when the Log4j problem hit, that was a addressed vulnerability for a year.
Yeah.
Right. So kind of attacking open source doesn't solve the problem in any way, shape, or form. Right. Fundamentally, security is a problem. There's no two ways about it, right? We've talked about it a lot on this podcast, right? And we do, in fact, need to change the way we build software, right? But we're a generation, right? Today, I don't pay my software developers to consider security. I pay them to trust by default because I pay them for speed. I don't pay them for security. I pay them for speed. Security is 100% friction. How do I take people that have been doing that for 30 years that are absolute unequivocal experts in their field and say, hey, oh, by the way, all of the stuff you did before, don't do it that way. Right.
And most code is built by someone who learned Python in 21 days. They're not 40-year software engineers. Right.
Yeah.
So,
well, and a lot of the software vulnerabilities that we find are either the whoever utilized the code didn't update it, or they used a component for something the component wasn't really supposed to be used for, but it worked anyways, and so they moved on.
Right.
So where's the liability in that? Right. If I pay for an API and I poorly write to the API and it's hacked and my company's data is stolen, who owns the responsibility?
And above and beyond all of this, you can't possibly apply any of this retroactively. Right. The amount of new code being built is significantly smaller than all the existing code that is in the world. Therefore, it's not really attacking the problem in any way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can't force a customer to update.
Yeah.
Right.
So funny you mention that. That actually does come up in the plan, right? Of software developers have an obligation and have a requirement to continue to support. Well, this creates two potential problems that would have to be addressed. First, we can do that. We can support and updates can be done, but forced updates are not going to. I mean, there are
they don't work.
Places where it can happen, but that's not going to happen.
Outside of SaaS, it's not possible.
Nope.
Right.
I mean, I can DNS again, right? I can just block the update server. Problem solved.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
And
there's a ton of valid reasons to do that. Right. Like there's a ton of reasons why you want to block the update server. I have custom code that runs against this application that my business depends on. Every time the manufacturer updates it, they break my custom code, right? Because their change control systems aren't any damn good either. So I have to block the updates because all the updates break everything. Well, now I have to manually do updates, which means I'm always going to be behind. Who owns the liability in that case? Right? Like it's this stuff is just terrible. There's just no two ways about it. It's just terrible.
No, updates are made available. But the other issue too is how are we going to address software that's gone end of life? I mean, think about it. When XP went end of life, how many companies kept using XP because it works?
Or I knew a ton of companies that do testing, right? Medical testing, machine testing, whatever. Their test equipment is just simply not compatible. It's a $250,000 piece of gear to get one that's compatible with a new version of the operating system. They don't have a choice. They're not the totality of the business for a decade wouldn't offset the capital expense for the piece of gear, right? So there's all kinds of reasons why this stuff happens. This is simply short-sighted.
Yeah. And the reverse, right? Telling software companies that, hey, your software is still in use, even though you declared it end of life. You have to incur the cost to continue to update and maintain it, even though you've washed your hands of this particular piece of software. That is gonna that puts us into an interesting quandary, right? Do I have to provide those maintenance services for free? Are the companies that have enjoyed, maintenance is rolled into the licensing cost now going to be willing to pay, an additional maintenance fee for software that has been declared end of life? I don't see the market bearing that one out. Because neither side's going to be willing. And in that same topic, one of the other things that gets called out is, well, it's just not okay that the software developers can disclaim all liability by contract. I have negotiated, I would say, tens of thousands of agreements at this point. That disclaimer of all liability, first off, for B2B software products, there's wiggle room in that one. It's not just full flat out, there's zero liability, right? That is not reflective of how the contracting nature works these days. Also, where there are substantial carve-outs of liability, the product is priced accordingly. If liability is going to, if there's going to be increased liability, the cost of software is going to increase.
Well, and to be clear, right, software is everything.
Right.
All hardware is all software. So you're not going to escape the liability because you make a hardware appliance. Your hardware appliance still has code that runs on it. You're still considered a software manufacturer, right? And therefore, the cost of doing business in software, which is all business today, will have to go up. How much it goes up, we have no idea yet. No.
But that increased cost and the increased investment that it's going to take undercuts another attempt of the plan is we want to encourage startups. We want to allow for more competition. That is the exact opposite of what creates those incentives. If it's going to be that much more expensive for me to, and it doesn't just cut against startups in the tech space, right? People that are developing hardware, that are developing software. This cuts against the startups that have to acquire the technology, acquire the software, acquire the hardware to pursue whatever startup they're doing, right? Yep. It cuts at both sides, which is completely counter to what we're trying to do here, right?
What's the likelihood that premium price tag is not going to creating better software and actually going to insurance companies for...
That is correct.
Right? You're actually just creating another marketplace of insurance. You're not actually fixing any security problem.
You won't solve anything, anything at all. Nothing.
So then, so then, where's the middle ground between creating libelous action on individual software developers and the Great Firewall of the United States? Like, there's a middle ground between those two, right?
Yeah, and the plan to be fair, the plan does contemplate some safe harbors and development of a safe harbor that if you meet certain requirements, right, you can have safe harbor. Right, that exists already. We've got safe harbors for copyright infringement under DMCA. We've got safe harbors for activities of users through the Communications Decency Act. And so this sets up this system of, you can have a safe harbor, but in order to do that, how much are you going to have to tell people about what you're doing, and who's setting the requirements? And do we have different requirements for different types of software, right? Are we talking about software that's embedded within hardware? Are we talking a consumer application? Where does that safe harbor go? And the problem with this and with other approaches like this is it's trying to cast this wide net without really thinking about the individual circumstances, right? This is akin to, all right, well, we have specifications for manufacturing vehicles. Okay. So with this, unless some really good thought goes into this, this would be akin to saying any vehicle capable of operating has to meet these certain specifications. So a bike has to meet the same specifications as a Ferrari. Nope. That's right. So that's what this structure could wind up setting up. And granted, it is an overview document, it's a roadmap, but it highlights the issues and the depth that go here that legislation, statutes, regs, controls don't really contemplate well of how to start dividing all of this up, because there's a difference between software that you use to operate a banking platform versus software that you're using to run a manufacturing facility. There's still concerns on both sides, but what those concerns are, where those vulnerabilities show up, very different. So unless we're talking about industry and even sub-industry level, controls, we're going to have something that's too overbroad. It's going to be too complicated to comply with. And the more complicated a law is to comply with, the less it's followed, and frankly, the less it's enforced. And so all of this becomes window dressing, and it makes the cost of doing business go up without really any tangible benefits showing up on the other side. And I can't envision a world where software developers, service providers want to continue operating where clicking a link that somebody should know full well, this is a scam, this is a phishing attack, that then subjects them to liability. We cannot expect us to identify every possible place that we have to protect users from themselves, right? We have laws out there that do this exact thing. You think about, I know in Denver, right? We get announcements about it every once in a while. It is against the law to leave your car running unless you have remote start, right? So you can't go out, turn the car on, let all the defroster work. That is against the law. Why? Well, because it makes the car easier to steal. But that is a law directly against the end user and not against the automotive manufacturer. That, the allegory here, I don't want to give anybody any ideas, but would be, well, the ignition can only be turned on and it has to stay on as long as there's a butt in the seat. As soon as that butt leaves the seat, the car has to have a kill switch. That's what this is. That's the level that this could potentially go to if not well thought out.
But isn't there value in helping the citizens protect themselves? So while I appreciate the negative impact of critical infrastructure, if I take the impact of TikTok and stealing citizens' data and giving them to CCP, isn't that worth protecting in some way?
But that's completely different, right? We're not talking. TikTok is just an active. This is an intelligence gathering, system. Right. It's not I click a link, and that then exposes the AD server, right?
Right.
That's the difference here, right? It's using something that has, I hesitate to say legitimate value, right? There's some legitimate value potentially with TikTok, right? Funny videos, but it's the compromise of systems for, right? This is opening up something for somebody else to get in. Now, I do think that, and one of the places, and right, the industry is addressing this through contract, and addressing this through insurance. The folks that are holding the data, right? The service providers that are responsible for being the stewards of the data, seeing more liability on their side, isn't necessarily completely out of bounds, right? And that is the place more that reading through the entirety of the plan, that's really what they're talking about. They're not talking about the person that's shipping out the software. They're talking about those that are running the hosted environments, not necessarily the host, the big main hosts, but the folks that are operating the hosted service on AWS that decide not to configure it the right way, or fat finger configuration so they make everything publicly available. Yeah, there should be some level of liability there. And it shows up in agreements. It shows up in the contracts for those services, right? Where it is getting to the point, it's not there completely yet, but it's getting to the point of, if you won't, as a provider, if you won't stand up for, hey, if we misconfigure stuff and we take the liability, it's getting tougher and tougher to get the agreement and to get people to subscribe to your service. They'll go to somebody else that will. So that's become table stakes, and it's become table stakes at a contract level. To then, though, push it to a statutory level, that is going to now give the ability for, again, costs to go up. And it starts to, by over-regulating in the space, it creates potential for holes to develop. Services that are over-regulated, right, for what they do, for their whole purpose, why would anybody use them? Why would anybody want to produce them if all of the hoops you got to jump through to use the service way outweigh any sort of utility that come from that service? All right, let's kill that industry. Let's kill that, that line of services. Whereas others that they're going to be under-regulated, because unless we go to the greatest, strictest, most stringent set of controls there are, we're going to have under-regulated services. Well, vulnerabilities are going to still exist there. And those become the targets, because we know they don't have to do X, Y, and Z. They should be doing them. So now they're the target.
Well, I feel more informed. HH, you have any concluding remarks?
Ultimately, this stuff has the potential to be hugely disruptive, hugely negative, and damaging. Please take a minute, gather your own thoughts, and communicate with your representatives. Communicate with, your companies. Make sure that you are informed. It's not a reason to panic. This isn't law, but I hope this starts to kind of make you feel like maybe you should be paying attention to what's going on in laws that affect technology, because this stuff is incredibly complex, and it's likely being decided by people who've never run the stuff.
Likely, absolutely.
The evidence that I see is completely lacking in anyone that's ever run anything.
Yeah.
Carlos.
I'm gonna sit down after recording to take notes. I was trying to pay attention. The only one thing is, this gonna apply all the way up to enterprises, to small businesses, or is it a bracket that if they make over a certain, because I think that could have also a bigger impact, at least here in the US. There's a lot of small businesses that they may not develop like we think, but they, like you said, they put services together and they offer it to other smaller businesses, and they don't have sometimes the skills to secure it correctly.
Yeah. Well, and then, I mean, within security, the percentage of security companies that are not US based is getting higher and higher, right? Does this
Right.
provide an extreme leg up for those companies? Right? Are we making it so what was a $3 million investment to start a security company is now a $5 million investment because of the increased cost in legal and insurance, right? Does that create a barrier for entry into the market that's going to be damaging to us in the long term? There's a large ripple effect to this that I think we really need to be on top of.
Well, I know that there's going to be a lot of conversation about this. My friends, like we say always, take the time, sit down with your team, understand the challenges and how this can impact your company. Make sure that you share, you subscribe, and we'll see you on our next episode.